think people have to click a button and approve that, so to speak. And so welcome everyone. Thanks for your patience in my getting a whole new technology setup going. I think I did okay. I'm Luminara Serdar of Autism Transformed, and I am going to be interviewing Dr. Roseanne Campana-Hodge today, who's just the most amazing, wonderful woman. She is a mental health trailblazer and a real support for our kids. She's the founder of the Global Institute of Children's Mental Health. She's a media expert who Forbes says is changing the way we view and treat children's mental health, and amen to that, because we really need that. And she's helped thousands through her clinic and her work and her programs, thousands of kids with really challenging conditions, ADHD, anxiety, mood, Lyme, which is really prevalent out there on the East Coast in Connecticut, PANS and PANDAS, and she's using really proven scientific therapies. So Roseanne has also written a book recently, I think it's just out, called It's Gonna Be Okay, and it's a guide for parents who are looking for help for their kids' mental health in this day and age. It's so important, right, Dr. Rowe?
It is, yeah, because, so many kids are struggling, and that's why parents are part of this community, because we're all looking for solutions. And that's really my specialty, is really science-backed solutions that create change.
Absolutely. Do you want to say anything else about your background or your experience before we just jump in?
Just that I've had the privilege of being in mental health. This is my 30th year. And I am a special needs mom times two. And I already was working with kids with special needs before I had my own kids with special needs. So I understand it from all sides. That's really it.
Yeah, that's really the full 360-degree experience, right?
Yeah.
So obviously we've just come out of this whole pandemic COVID period, and I'm just really curious what you've seen with kids throughout this period, especially with all the changes in online schooling and lack of social interactions.
Yeah. I've seen a lot. I've seen a small subset of kids do really well and sort of thrive during this time. I would say it's small. But I think it's been really hard on a lot of levels. I think what we know is, like, there's already been survey research both in the States, and not just both, but in the States, Europe, in Asia. So, we definitely know there has been an impact. There's an increased anxiety, depression, as well as there's been an increase in suicidal ideation amongst kids. And,
They're mostly teens, just curious.
mostly teens and young adults. But, we do know that before this, there was a doubling of suicidal ideation and suicide attempts in kids ages 10 to 17, 56% increase in the decade before. So that's already pretty dramatic. And I do see a lot more kids in crisis, and I work with people, not just in Ridgefield, Connecticut, but all over the world. So the flavor of it is changed. Even when I, let's say 10 years ago, if I had somebody in Europe or even Canada, it felt like the issues weren't as severe because the supports were different. There's more of a community, there's more of a healthy foods are more readily available. And now it doesn't feel as different. It feels like there has just sort of been an eclipse, and stress is just an all-time high. And we know parents are really stressed right now. The APA does a survey every year. American Psychological Association says, 70% of parents have significant pandemic stress. No surprise. But I think our special needs kids, whether kids have a formal diagnosis or not, I think parents, number one, I never got more new cases than I probably ever have during this pandemic. And I mean new cases, I meant cases that parents were almost surprised that their kids were struggling, and that was unusual, because usually parents come to me and they're like, I know something's going on. But I think because parents really had this bird's eye view of how their kids were learning and paying attention, and or what happened when structure wasn't in place, or when happened when they weren't socializing, they got to really see their kids maybe struggle more than they realized, or sometimes even the first time. I think that's probably very much the truth, for a lot of it. And then, our kids that already struggle socially, this was so hard for them because the distance component just is not conducive to awesome socialization.
Do you find that, I mean, I think probably by now it's summer, but most kids had gone back a little bit before.
Mhm.
Did you find that they had problems or difficulty sort of coming back into this?
Re-entering.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so funny, Luminar, like in the beginning of the pandemic, I was talking about re-entry panic syndrome. Then I was talking about re-entry anxiety. Now I'm talking about re-entry socialization. And I don't mean just for kids. I think adults are actually having even harder time. I think I have had some kids that couldn't go back. And most of those kids had anxiety or OCD. They just got too acclimated at home, and or their anxiety increased during that time and they just couldn't transition back. So I see a subset of that. I think most kids were like, I don't care if I'm wearing a mask. I don't care what restrictions I have. I'm so psyched to be outside of my house and back to school. I think kids really were happy and transitioned well for the most part. I think the hardest thing, and this is like, what's going to happen in the fall, right? Like, so we're going to have real school everywhere, Luminar, like people going back 5 days a week.
Well, unless we have another like hit of something, right?
Right. But the plan is 5 days.
Sure.
Right. So we're going to have kids are going to have to go back on a different sleep schedule. Right. They're going to have different learning. They're going to have to remember what it's like to not have to sit in front of a Zoom meeting or Google Meet. I think it's going to be really different. But I feel like, I mean, what have you seen with kids transitioning back to school?
It's similar when you were talking about the kids who had high anxiety. They also, like, I think they feel better in the mask because their anxiety is so high going into, a potential problem, right? So, right, the high anxiety ones are still, a little standoffish, but most kids they want it. They want to go back.
They want to go back. They don't care under what conditions. They're like, get me back, And I saw situations where people were bringing their kids to me thinking that they had ADD. And of course, we know that there was a big increase in ADD meds during this time. And people were bringing their kids to me like, my kid has ADD, and I can do a QEG or a brain check where I look at averages, and then you do a clinical history, and they just didn't meet the profile. They were struggling, maybe due to anxiety, maybe due to, hello, we're not designed to be in front of a computer with lights on us all day. It's really not optimal learning. It's really so 2D. There's no real interaction that goes on. Even my younger son goes to a really tiny school. And when they missed 0 days of school this year. But last year they did March through whatever. And he's ridiculously focused. It's obscene. And and I've done his brain map. He's only does PMF and biofeedback. He doesn't do neurofeedback. And he's very focused, but he could not focus virtually. It was like a nightmare. He hated every minute of it. He's a hands-on learner. And he just couldn't do it. And, at the time he was 9, and, it was so hard. And I think that other people felt the same way about their kids, and was starting to question, do they have ADD? And just because your kid struggled with virtual learning may or may not mean they have ADD. You really have to look at what came before,
Well, you mentioned there's a difference between stress and anxiety.
Yeah.
So can you define that for people? Because I mean, I have my ideas, but
yeah. No, so such a good question, because it is really common, right? And, we'll talk about what stress and anxiety is, but chronic stress can lead to anxiety, and we don't talk about that enough. And so, we have this system that regulates our stress response. It's called the autonomic nervous system. And our autonomic nervous system helps us manage, danger, make decisions about whether something is a stressor or not. So when everyday stressors happen, our autonomic nervous system goes from this relaxed parasympathetic state to a stressed out sympathetic dominant state, and it goes up. Right. So your child is late for school and they're missing their shoe and they're looking around frantically. So they go into a sympathetic dominant state and then they find their shoe. And if they have a really regulated nervous system, it goes back down. Right. But what's happening is, our kids, especially our special needs kids, right? So they might have trouble with attention. They might have trouble with learning at the same rate as others, or they might struggle socially, or all three. It means they're always behind. There's always a catch up. There's always an intervention. It may mean they need a lot of correcting, which can feel very negative to a kid and really impact their self-esteem. So their nervous system starts getting into a more hyper state. And once you're really in this sympathetic dominant state, your nervous system is going to react to what we call benign things, right? Sounds. Maybe it's the mother's voice, right? We always get slammed, moms, right?
No, I have someone who is, it's the father's voice when he's on the phone.
Yeah.
Who knows what it's going to be? Maybe it's the vacuum or the leaf blower or whatever.
Exactly. Maybe it's lights. Maybe it's sensory, and so they start getting to be more sensitive to, they dysregulate. And how can that dysregulation show up? Attention, learning, behavior, right? That's what everything is about. Is your nervous system regulating or not? And every special needs kid has a level of dysregulation in their nervous system, right? And so when you're stressed and your nervous system goes back down because you are taking care of your nervous system and you're able to, do what it's supposed to. It's sort of like, I always equate everything to cars. So, it's like saying you take your car for its tune-up, right? There's nothing wrong with your car, but you take it for a tune-up to be preventative so that when it's a terrible raining in different parts of the United States, right? Because of the storm that came through. And so let's say your treads got real low, but you didn't notice it because it wasn't raining. But then all of a sudden it rains and you don't have any treads, you're going to be in trouble. And so we want to protect our nervous system. So what's happening is we're not always aware that our kids get into these hyper stress activated states because we're conditioned to think there must be a single stressor, the death of a dog, moving, a divorce. These are things that absolutely can throw you into clinical anxiety, but so can chronic long-term stress. And we have to rethink what stress is because parents think, I've got a great house, I'm loving, my kid eats great, how can they be stressed? Well, it happens for a variety of reasons, right? Infectious disease, just these things, academics being harder, all these things we talk about. What about peer stuff, right? Kids are rough today.
And I've heard also that some kids are actually listening to the news with their parents. And I don't think that's really calming at all. So they get hyper about that. They get anxious about the state of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I try to watch the weather and get out. You know what I'm saying, Luminara? Even though Duran was on today on the Today Show, I didn't get to watch that. I mean, hopefully I'll see it later on YouTube. But yeah, absolutely. It's not good. And, our bright kids, like we always think about our kids. So many of our kids can even be 2E, right? They can be autism and have a high IQ and they're twice exceptional, right? And we often think because kids are so bright, they can process everything, but they're almost always normal or less, right? If you have autism, right? And spectrum, your social emotional is not in the same level. And so there's a disconnect. So you cognitively can process it, but you're still just normal on the emotional side. And it's really going to be a struggle. It's going to cause an irritation, a difficulty understanding. And I think anytime I explain this to parents, are always like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what happens. Like, I think they get this cognitive part, but that's only one part of how you process, right? And really smart kids start to understand it at a much deeper level than a typical kid because they have this ability to connect. And but then the emotional side is they're like, oh my gosh, somebody actually died in that car accident, where another kid might be like, oh, there's a car accident, it didn't happen to me, boop, and move on, right? That's probably a kid who's just typical on that end. But when it's clinical anxiety, the difference is when it moves to clinical, it's interfering with your life in some way. So it's interfering with relationships, it's interfering with learning, it's interfering with your schoolwork, and it's got to be significant. And oftentimes parents like Luminar will say that it crept up, right? And when they look back, they can connect the dots. They saw belly aches. They saw what kids on the spectrum often ask a lot of repeated questions, need for reassuring questions. That's one of the most missed things. So what does that look like? That means that your kid maybe is a weather worrier. Okay. So every time it rains, they're like, or it's about to rain, is it going to rain? And you inadvertently go, let's check the weather. I don't think it's going to rain. And you become their life preserver, and they don't have that ability to regulate, and they just put their anxiety, and you're just being very loving. You think you're helping, but they don't develop the coping skills to manage that worry. And it really can grow very quickly. It's almost like you're almost giving them fuel for the fire and you don't even realize it. That's one of the biggest things that anxious kids do. They need a lot of reassurance from you, and you inadvertently give it to them. You're not doing anything wrong. You just don't understand how the brain works, and that it really is a negative reinforcement loop, and it just causes it to actually them to get further stuck.
That right there is gold. And I want to dig into that a little bit.
Yeah.
But first, I just want to summarize what you said, that stress is a lot of little things potentially, or maybe one big thing like a death that dysregulates the nervous system. So we can't really calm down. And then anxiety is when that just gets so overwhelming and we stay in that stuck mode.
Yeah.
And
That's exactly right. And it's so easy for it to happen. It can happen to us. Like, who doesn't feel like this now? Who
I was
isn't
thinking that as you were talking, it was like, oh my gosh, I think 99% of us are in stress mode.
Well, and stress can be good or bad. Like, I'm coming off of a second book launch in I had one in October and I had one in May. I'm freaking tired. So, and so your body is going to react. I mean, I'm constantly countering it with all the healthy things that I do. But, we don't think of, what are the top stressors? Number one is divorce. I think number two is death. And number three is the wedding or birth. So wedding or birth, good times.
Yeah, true.
But we don't really think about all these things. So you might be really excited that you're moving into a beautiful house, but your kid might be really, difficult for them,
Yeah, because it's so different. So I really want you to go over some coping strategies, because you just said about this
accommodation
when your child is anxious, and we kind of reinforce that negatively. So what would a parent do instead?
Yeah. Let's talk about that. So, it's called accommodation, and it's one of the actual feeders of anxiety that often flips into OCD. And OCD is something that I want to mention because not many people talk about it, and they misinterpret it as anxiety. And OCD is one of the most treatment resistant conditions on the planet.
Can you just say what, spell it out?
Yeah. What OCD, how treatment resistant?
Oh, that it's obsessive compulsive disorder.
Oh, obsessive compulsive disorder. Oh, I'm so sorry. So obsessive compulsive disorder. And let me just say, I'll explain what obsessive compulsive disorder is and some of the misnomers about it. So it is not anxiety. Okay. And it requires a completely different treatment from anxiety. I'm going to tell you that's one of the biggest problems with OCD. It gets treated the same as anxiety, and the treatment for anxiety often actually worsens the OCD. So that's a whole other thing. But we think of OCD as just compulsions like hand washing and checking and those kind of things. And for most people, it really starts with obsessive thinking, looping thoughts, intrusive thoughts. And many times it shows itself with reassuring questions, forced rituals. They'll make their parents do bedtime rituals. And there's estimated that up to a third of kids on the spectrum also have OCD.
I can tell you that for sure. Like I have kids who all the dining room chairs have to be
Yeah.
pushed just so, all the lights
Yeah.
have to be off, certain things have to be out
Yeah.
of the room or in their place,
Yep.
all that kind of stuff.
And people like toss around OCD like it's nothing, like, oh, I got a little OCD. You know, with OCD, you have to have an hour or more a day of obsessive thinking or compulsions. And OCD is one of those mental health conditions that can cause you to be completely stuck for years or decades. And there's very, very effective treatments. We do a combination of either neurofeedback and PMF or just neurofeedback with the Mac Daddy #1 most evidence-based treatment, ERP for OCD, which is exposure and response prevention. And the whole base of this is breaking the accommodations.
You'll go into what those are, right?
Yeah. So
Okay.
here's what accommodations is, and it starts back to your conversation. And I love to talk about OCD really, truly, because it's so missed and it's mistreated. And parents, I had a parent come to me this week and they're literally like, we're completely hijacked. Like our whole family, it's a kid on the spectrum with OCD. And I'm not revealing anything because this is what we do. And we have lots of kids like this. And their whole family has to accommodate the one child with their obsessive thinking, and they have some compulsive behaviors, but it's mostly obsessive thinking, and it's every question is a loaded question. So
one quick thing I want to put in there is I've talked to some parents who have their kids are obsessive about dirt, being dirty, coming home from school, needing to take a shower. The one parent whose son, everything was dirty. So he's constantly changing his clothes and bed sheets, and she was constantly doing laundry. So that's the hijacking thing, but that's like over the top, right? So this fits into that category.
Yeah. And I wouldn't say that's over the top. That's pretty standard OCD. Okay. People get caught in doing these routines. So what happens with OCD, they have a worry. Okay. And kids with anxiety have a worry. And then you develop a coping mechanism. Your coping mechanism can be healthy. We'll go over that, or could be unhealthy, right? So what's a cope? So Dr. Roseanne book tour. So I have to really hit it hard with my coping mechanisms. That means getting up a little earlier, making sure I have at least 30 minutes exercise, trying to eat extra clean, doing breath work very, very intensely multiple times throughout the day. And then I do PMF every night.
Can you explain what PMF is?
Oh, pulse electromagnetic frequency training. I'll talk about the tools or what it is, but it's a way to regulate your nervous system, get it from that sympathetic dominant to parasympathetic. It does other stuff too, changes the way the cells talk, so that it improves cellular communication. And then it also, so is it OCD? And then what it also does is it reduces inflammation, and then so that improves detoxification. It's like a standard of care for me with anybody with OCD, PANS, PANDAS, or autism. It would be the only time it's contraindicative is if you have a pacemaker. It's the only person who can't do it. It's pretty amazing. And I use a very specific kind of PMF that's controllable based on symptoms. So I can make these very customized protocols. And we have devices that we send people, and they purchase them, and we create protocols and they get to use it. I call it Jetson's family medical care. It's pretty awesome because you can have a kid. My friend's son was over this weekend. He's very, he's what we'd call moderate functioning. He's on the low end of moderate functioning autism. So he has a low IQ, but he's very functional, and he requires a one-to-one aid. And he's gotten very anxious during the pandemic. I'm allowed to talk about him. And he, his mom came to me and she said, Roseanne, he's really getting stuck in his rituals. You can see the increased motor movement. I was like, I totally can see increased motor movement. And I also could see that he was getting anxious about other people's behavior at my house. And so, and he gets anxious and can get aggressive when there's a lot of loud little kids. And the only child he's ever liked is my youngest, Giancarlo, because Giancarlo's super chill because he does PMF every day. So, and he doesn't make sudden movements, and he's just not a loud kid. So he really loves Giancarlo, and then he'll perseverate on Giancarlo. Like if his my son is a jerk to his brother, normal child, normal behavior, Jason, the other child, will get upset. So his mom said to me, look, is this time for risperidone? Is this time for Abilify? And I was like, Jen, let's try some GABA right now. So I go and get the GABA, and I was like, give it 30 minutes. So we did some GABA, we did some PMF, and she was like, holy crap, Roseanne, he's like totally better. And I was like, you need some GABA too, Jen. So she took some GABA. I had that one, and he was able to do that. And she was able to see how different. And his rituals were, it's very careful to not accommodate. So what is accommodation? Let me give you
I just wanted to interject that GABA is a calming neurotransmitter that you can take orally, and that'll help the brain to calm down.
Yeah. So you get too many excitatory neurotransmitters, and what GABA does is an amino acid that cuts that excitatory neurotransmitter. I'm not saying it's the end all be all for everybody, but I was like, this is going to help, and we're going to know. We're going to know within an hour, Jen, if it's going to work. Mm-hmm. So I sent her home with, a supply, and she's psyched. And so let's talk about what accommodation is. Let's talk about, as I like to say, nerdy, brainy stuff with Dr. Rowe, because you need to understand the neuroscience. So anxiety starts, and then, as I said, we have maladaptive and good ways to cope. So good ways to cope, as I mentioned, would be breath work, or taking a minute away, or whatever it is that you do. And then launch in like,
sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. And then maladaptive, would be you all of a sudden avoid people. Maybe you yell at people. But with OCD, you get a pattern of intrusive thoughts that you get stuck in, and they don't make sense. So let's give you common examples. So common examples, a lot of people have intrusive thoughts about things like that are sexual basis, religious, harm of somebody they love, harm of themselves, demons, like just really dark kind of things is pretty normal. But it also, like, it could be things like, I'm afraid I'm going to choke. So some of the top ones that I see are fear of choking, fear of vomiting, and worried about somebody they love dying. There's also a lot of germ stuff, and not in the ways that you think of in hand washing. A lot of times it could be food restricting. This is very common with autism. There's a co-occurrence. And then, about 35% of kids on the spectrum also have PANS and PANDAS. So there's like a whole lot. Sometimes we get kids with, like, I got 2 kids this week, autism, PANS, PANDAS, OCD. So it's not that unusual. They do co-occur for a lot of reasons that we don't have to get into right now. So what happens with accommodating, let's give you an example. So it is when your child has a ritual or a thought, just like I said, that you said, I'm worried it's going to rain, right? And in that child's head, the rain means that their house is going to flood. The rain means that their house is going to get, lightning strike, whatever it is. Okay. I have seen the gamut of things that you can possibly imagine. So the parent then says, let's check the weather. Or, Amy, it's not going to rain. We've already checked the weather. Well, that is actually accommodating. I'm going to show you how to not accommodate and teach them how to cope. And so when you're like, what harm am I doing? Well, you're actually feeding the barking dog. So the child has the worry in their mind. And remember, these are irrational thoughts. These make no sense. Your child has formed an association that if the parent tells them it's not going to rain, then neurologically, this negative association, what happens is that they spike into a sympathetic dominant. Their question gets answered, their anxiety lowers. So what will happen is every time the parent answers a question, anxiety lowers. So what happens in behavior, everybody? Behavior increases, 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 increases. This is why OCD, it's like literally throwing fuel on the fire. So a different way to handle that is about teaching coping skills, right? And I love to talk about coping skills in extremes. So how the parent should have handled it or can handle it, and this is what we do in exposure and response prevention. It's a lot of psychoeducation, teaching you how to talk back to the OCD, and then safe exposures so that the child learns they have their worry, they spike, spike, spike. They do an exposure, and then immediately they realize on a neurological level, oh, that didn't happen, and it goes down. And so what happens in ERP is you go spike and then down, then the spike gets a little lower and then it goes down, and hopefully it's a full extinguish, which most people don't want to talk about, that you can get rid of behaviors and clinical conditions, but we do all the time. There's a lot of factors in it, and it requires a lot of things. So what should they have this parent?
Could you
Yeah.
give me an example, like the I'm afraid of the rain real life example,
Yes.
what that exposure and response and prevention would be?
Yeah. So what would happen with this parent is we would train the parent to say, oh, so you think it's going to rain. Okay. So you were worried about it yesterday and you got through it. How did you get through it? And your kid might be like, like, I don't know. Okay, well, you got through it yesterday. So let's think about how you got through it yesterday. You really want to get them to problem solve. You really want them to be in charge, and you don't want to be their life preserver. And, or, let's say a child asks you the question, then quickly says, I know it's not going to rain. It's just my OCD. And then you would say, that's right. And you did a great job. Let's move on to something, move on to something else. You want to reinforce it, move on to something else. You definitely never want to check the weather. You do not want to answer the weather question. And they could ask you 5 times in a row and say, you've now asked me 5 times. What could you do right now instead of ask me? What can you do to talk back to your OCD? And sometimes we name it. Sometimes we call it something. I mean, you can get really creative, and you learn how to do this. And the same thing with what's the difference between OCD and anxiety is the OCD, it occurs, again, it's an hour a day or more. And there's a fine line between that kid who needs a lot of reassurance. And I think anybody who's here that has a kid with OCD is like, oh, I knew when it flipped to OCD. Like, it's literally hijacking the family, in a lot of ways. I have seen just the intrusive thoughts can be so outside of the norm that it can be scary. Like, so for example, some kids, and this is where I see people misdiagnosed, can have intrusive thoughts that they will harm themselves, even though they don't want to harm themselves. Okay, so let me explain what that looks like. So I'm worried that I'm going to hang myself. Well, do you want to hang myself? No. But in my head, I keep thinking I'm going to. You know how many times I've had kids admitted into psych hospitals where they think they're suicidal and they never once put it together that they have OCD. You have to go back and look for other forms of the OCD. That's not going to be the only way, but when kids are in crisis and they say they're going to harm themselves or other, that's the only thing they focus on. So you
that's
really
an OCD that's just looping.
Just looping. And absolutely. And it's so important to have this conversation because, again, it's just such a co-occurring thing. So somebody says, my son's vocal gets loud with repetitive behavior. Is that OCD? So I just did a staff meeting today about the difference between spectrum rigidity and OCD. Okay. So where does restricted interest begin and OCD, right? So that's a tough call, right? And there has to be some clinical distinguishing. The heightened level of agitation that they have a worry, there's a worry to it, not just an upset. that you're transitioning them off, right? So an upset is like, I'm angry because you're making me get off. I always think of Thomas, right? You're making me get off your, the Thomas or the cars or sports or whatever their restricted interest is. And they transition off, right? But with OCD, the questioning is going to continue. The rigidity around it is going to continue far out of that. And you're going to feel as frustrated. That's where you start to know, like, wow, this is really sort of wearing me down with the questioning or the behaviors or the tapping. And then there are compulsions, like kids having to tap, kids having to have order, and those kind of things. But so his vocal gets loud with repetitive behavior. Is that OCD? That's probably repeated vocalizations. I'd have to know more to say that is OCD or not, but hopefully that helps you distinguish between it. Is there a distress part of it that continues and they look for reassurance, or they have compulsive patterns that continue? And they can be subtle, guys. Like sometimes I'm like, is that kid counting? Is he doing things a certain amount of times? That's obsessive behavior, and does it meet the mark of OCD? Is it occurring an hour or more a day?
So the difference, in this situation with the vocal stims, it's
Yeah,
if there's also a mental worry thought that goes along
right.
with it, then you suspect OCD, and then you might do that ERP, the exposure response prevention, and you said you also might do PEMF, and what else?
Neurofeedback. I do a lot of neurofeedback. So for people who don't know what neurofeedback is, it's really a way to get your brain and your nervous system from a dysregulated state to a regulated state. And that dysregulation can show up in attention and learning and behavior. And you work on not just specific regions in the brain, but I typically like to work on, particularly with kids on the spectrum, is the neural networks, because we know that their brain communication center is really where most of the issues are. There are certain regions that are more impaired with kids on the spectrum, but it's really how their brain talks from site to site. And which is why you have kids who are so smart in certain areas, but then it doesn't seem to connect. It's because of the neural connections. And that's what neurofeedback does. It really beefs up your neural connections. And it's super pleasant. Tens of thousands of research studies, 3,000 peer reviewed, 50 years old. It's been so helpful and a game changer for a lot of kids on the spectrum, for everything from having a focus problem to impulse control or stimming or whatever it is. It's not supposed to raise your IQ, but when you improve attention, you're going to do better on IQ tests. Some of my parents are like, you got me 8 or 9 points, on an IQ test. And when somebody's a 60 IQ, that's a huge difference, so it really depends on what parents want. It's not a miracle cure, but it definitely is a powerful tool for not just regulating the nervous system, but really changing how specific regions in the brain work.
That's amazing. I want to talk a little bit about the focus, attention,
Yeah.
and control, because I know, a lot of my audience I have kids on the somewhere on the spectrum, mostly are ADHD and sensory processing disorder. So, do you have any strategies because when I work with people, they first, if their child's not speaking, they want them to speak. And we know that comes
Yes.
much later. And then they also want attention and focus. And I think that comes much later after
Yeah.
you have to build some more baseline things. So can you speak a little bit to how you would help and like what you need to do maybe first or
Yeah. So there's the parent side of things that we can implement. And I certainly dive into all these things in my book, It's Going to Be Okay, and really lay out a platform of how to really change the biological terrain and do things in tandem as a parent. And then there's the clinical side, like the neurofeedback, the PMF, the biofeedback. These are things that are really tools that are when we have to directly improve things. I mean, they work. And there are providers who do these things all over the world. I do have to say it's as much a science as an art. And it's the number one determinant of success for neurofeedback is the skill of the practitioner. That is the truth. And there's no consistent way to do it. It's all based on that clinician's experience. So and that's why people come to me from all over, because I've just worked with thousands of kids, and young adults. I do adults. I'm just saying I like kids and young adults better. But what can parents do? There's so much a parent can do, right? So, Luminara talks a lot about nutrition and supplements, and there's absolutely, these are go-to things that are essential. But when we talk about learning and how can we improve learning, and I'm going to do a challenge on this in the fall, by the way, and how to improve attention and executive functioning. So, but what can you do? So first of all, you need structure and routine. I think that's one of the things that if you didn't have structure and routine in the pandemic, you got to see how quickly your kid could fall apart in all areas. And so why is that important to continue? Well, our kids with learning and attentional challenges, don't learn at the same rate. And that structure and routine provides scaffolding for them so that they don't have to think about the basics and they can get to the higher level things, which is following multiple step directions or learning new concepts. So it just gives them a neurological predictability that their brain doesn't have to waste power, right? So it's sort of like your desk, right? So somebody came in and cleaned my desk and it wasn't even that dirty, but all of a sudden they like put my stuff over here and I'm in the middle of interview and I don't have a freaking tissue. And I'm like, what's going on? Then they put my vitamin B over here. That's not where I have my vitamin B. My vitamin B is over here. So I literally have been having to think about things that I never had to think. My brain already knew there was a predictability, the structure is there. And I felt like I've been wasting time. So the lesson is I deliver. Yeah, right. Exactly. A lesson is I told everybody, thank you for cleaning my desk, but damn it, don't do it again. So structure and routine, whatever it is in your family, make sure you're consistent about that. And in that structure and routine needs to be physical exercise. I mean, the research tells us that adding in 30-minute sessions of moderate exercise improves a kid's attention who has ADHD 40%.
30-minute exercise sessions in what amount of time?
So 30-minute moderate in 1 week.
Oh, in a week. Okay.
Okay. The research says that. So we know it helps. Why does it help? One, you're combating like what we call tech neck. And my good friend, Dr. Krista Burns from the American Posture Institute, she talks about digital dementia. And, we're on our devices, and especially many of our nonverbal kids, that's their communication system. Well, we have to counter that. We can't be like this because you're going to reduce blood flow to the brain. You're sitting too much. So you're just not creating that energy. You're not really helping the neurotransmitters to flow that really help. So it's really, really important to always have that in your day. Plus, it helps to just regulate the nervous system and calm your child. And so many of our kids are sensory, and they need that sensory input to help them, pay attention, to regulate. And so you can dual purpose it, make it a sensory activity, but it's got to be a daily thing. Like your kids, whether you're getting support to do that through school or you're helping your child, it only helps you. You've got to do at least 30 minutes of movement a day. I mean, it's critical. And I don't think we talk enough about that, right? And it does just make a real difference in attention, right? The other thing is think about how your kids learn, right? Are they auditory? Are they visual? Are they kinesthetic? Do they need multiple, sense input? That's going to increase their brain's ability to pay attention, right? And think about time of day. Does your kid learn better at night? Do they learn better in the morning? How do you give them, learning activities or even chores at home? Like when is this happening, right? Those are great ways for parents to kind of hack in there. We're always thinking that there's a pill for it, right? Whether it's a supplement or a pharma, but it's so much more than that. And just lots of repetition. So we forget how much our kids need repetition in order to learn. And I know it's frustrating, but I think when you realize that It takes 34 times when you do something to learn it at an innate subconscious level, okay? But when you have a learning or a behavioral or an attentional challenge, it takes 3 times that amount,
Mhm.
minimum.
Well, those are some good strategies. I'm sure you go into those in your book. Just say a little bit about your book. It's going to be okay.
Yeah, so I wrote this book called It's Gonna Be Okay because it's what I tell every parent I work with. And they need to hear it. We need to hear it, right? And, you know, as I always say, like when your kid is struggling and you just can get on that damn worry train and it's so hard to get off. And so I always just found I would say to somebody, it's going to be okay. And then they would calm down and then they could process and hear me, right? And you know, it really is the platform for that I work with people. It's really you know, I talk about 8 pillars of reducing and reversing mental health symptoms. And I get a lot of pushback for people because reversing is not a word that's typically used in you know, mental health. When you're a licensed professional, they get pretty mad. And, you know, it just is a step-by-step way. It has all the research in it. And really, we're all looking for solutions. Why does everybody come to me? They need solutions for their struggling kids. And I'm just that person that when you have a complex issue or hopefully a mild issue, I get way more people who now recognize they have PANS and PANDAS and try to get help from me right in the beginning. And it's truly a resource. Like I've been getting amazing feedback because it's very digestible, and it has not only has like just jam packed with information, like each chapter could have been a book, I'm not lying. And but it has great anecdotal stories to really help paint the picture and really to help you see that your kid can get better.
Yeah.
So that's what my
I'll
book is
second
about.
the really readable, because just how you're talking is kind of
Yeah.
how it's written. It's really,
Yeah.
it's so
Very
straightforward.
readable. Even though I got 40 pages of citations in there, you know, I throw them in there. It's very readable. I just, you know, information can be presented in a way that makes sense. So I want people to not, you know, when your kid is struggling, you are overwhelmed too. And so I always say, just pick one thing and start there. So here's a mom asking, but my son is 9. I'm tired of teachers telling me he has lack of focus. I've tried breathing. He's not diagnosed, but I believe he has ADD. Here's the deal. If he's struggling with focus, there's something interfering with his focus. It might be ADD. It might be a learning and processing problem. You know, there's a different area of the brain that looks at sequencing. It might be a sequencing area in the brain. It might be attention. It might be anxiety. So, but he's struggling with focus. And so I do love essential oils. I do. I got my peppermint right here for focus, and and lemon too. I love lemon. Lemon's good. So, you know, if it quacks like a duck, it probably is, but it's one of his core issues. You don't have to have a clinical diagnosis to treat it. His, you know, his primary problem might be something else, but it's showing up as ADD and you know, as attention and executive functioning issues.
So how would you suggest, like a brain scan, or would you suggest some behavioral type things, or?
Yeah. I mean, there's different ways to go about it. I mean, let's be honest. You read my book. I love doing QEEG brain maps and brain checks. So I do QEEGs when people are within a drivable distance, or lots of people want to fly in. I got a couple people flying in from Europe this summer. I'm like, you better take some COVID tests before you come hang out with us for a couple of weeks. But I also do brain checks where we check statistically the averages of the EEG. So what is it? What is a Q? It tells me exactly what's going on in the brain. This area is working too much. This area is working too little. There's poor communication. And then you know which areas to turn back on. So it's a great rule it out. I always say check under the hood when you can, but you also can really take strategies to improve that attention, just like we talked about some of those strategies. But if it's been going on for a while, especially prior to the pandemic, teachers, we use grades as the benchmark of whether your kid has a mental health problem or not. So if you're a good student, your teacher's going to probably tell you your kid is fine. And I can't even tell you how many hundreds of times I get somebody in late high school or college, where the whole time the parent was like, I think it's this, I think it's this, I think it's this. And everybody's like, but he's doing great in school. He's doing great in school. And if your mama gut says there's a problem, there is. That's it. So, nobody ever regrets getting help. They only regret when they don't. So definitely take action, whether that's working with a specialist, somebody like me in your area, or me and my team, or you're going to really take action on your own. That's okay. Just do something and consistently try it.
Yeah, I would say use your book as a guide.
Yeah.
We do have another question. So this is a try, and maybe she can clarify. So Dr. Roseanne, 30 minutes of exercise in a day, does it need to be in the same session? Oh, does it need to be 30 continuous minutes?
Oh, that's a great question. I think in the research study, they did 30 minutes consecutive. But I don't think, and that's only 3 times in 1 week they did it in the research study, but it doesn't have to be. But I would definitely say, you always want to break a sweat when you're exercising. So for most people, that's 7 or 8 minutes in. And why do you want to break a sweat? Is you want to detox. So you're not detoxifying if you're not sweating. So I would definitely try to do at least 15-minute chunks just to really make sure that you're getting a good sweat. And you also want to build stamina, especially with so many of our special needs kids. I have a low tone kid. You really want to do core exercises and build stamina.
Yeah, I was going to say something earlier when you were talking about have your kids take a movement break. And yoga is really great, like something parents can do with their kids.
Amazing.
Get the yoga mat out. It really improves the lymph flow. You do some downward dogs and you can look up anywhere some kids yoga poses, and some of them can be really fun, like the lion where you roar, different animals. And you can make it fun. Like it doesn't have to be a chore.
We do like plank contests in our house, or downward dog. I got boys, they always want a contest. And I'm like, you can't do this longer than me, and we do things too, like even in our pool, when it gets boring, we're like, you can't touch the, you can't touch the bottom or the sides, and whoever does loses. So I'm like,
love a game. Don't touch.
We'll have a game, because how many times can I go down the slide? Like it's fun for a while, but I like to be in the pool. I'm like, I want to swim. I want to get some exercises in, just to ramp it up. And when my kids were little, I had a permanent obstacle course set up in my basement with just like simple things, mats and balls and stuff. And it was such a great, just an exercise. And I would say, we're going to do it for this many songs. I always did things by songs. My kids are music kids. Most kids like music. And it was so great to build executive functioning, like catch the ball, jump here, do this, executive functioning just doesn't happen. You have to work on building it.
And cross the midline, anything where you can, touch your hand to your opposite foot or knee.
Absolutely.
Like yeah.
I'm a big fan of those brain gym activities. We use that when people come to us and do intensives with us. And, it's definitely a really cool thing. It works.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's kind of like driving a car when you're 16 or however old you were when you learned. You're nervous and you don't know and you're looking all the time. But once you get really comfortable after 6 months or a few years in, it's like it's all secondhand. It's like all the things on your desk, right? They're all there.
Exactly.
You know where they are.
Yeah.
And it's not as hard because you've built that executive function, but you need
exactly. So such a great analogy. It's really true. And you need that practice, and you need you need your nervous system to regulate, but you also need to know where things are too. You have to see the picture, the big picture, right? When you're learning to drive, you're thinking about the instruments. Mm-hmm. You're not thinking about where you're going, and when you got a good executive functioning, you see the big picture first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Roseanne, you mentioned a fall challenge. So if you want to say something about that, like I could let people know about that for sure.
Yeah, I don't have it all set, and I'll give you that. We're going to do a challenge for attention and executive functioning. We're going to do that for sure, because everyone's asking me for this, and it will just be a 5-day, challenge. And I'll give you all the info, and you're welcome to share it. And for sure, we just did Raising Successful Kids Challenge. That was really pretty cool. And we did, basically, how do we hone in on kids' strengths? How do we build coping skills? And we just did that, and that was a lot of fun.
You can do that again?
I will do it again. It's up there if people want to get it. That they can go to Raising Successful Kids Community, and that directs you to a 7-day challenge, which
.com.
is .com. Sorry, Raising Successful Kids Community.com, and the challenge will show up. Because
And then,
that's not where my community is. My community is on a different page.
okay, but no, it's good to have a certain thing that people can remember to type in.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if someone wants to work with you with QEEG or PMM, all of these things, how would they do that?
Yeah, so I'm Dr. Roseann everywhere. So it's DRROSEANN and then .com. You would just go to my website, or I'm on TikTok and YouTube and Instagram, all is Dr. Roseann. Facebook is Dr. Roseann Cabana Hodge, because somebody else had Dr. Roseann. How dare they? And but yeah, we work with people all over the world, and we do remote. The process is that you set up a time if you're not coming in, which is perfectly fine. I have clients in Asia and Saudi Arabia. If you're in a decent time zone, we're working with you. If you're like on a completely opposite time zone and we can't make it happen, it's not going to happen. Hong Kong was tough. It's 12 hours difference.
Oh, that's really hard.
That's really hard. 8 hours with Saudi Arabia. We can make that work. And then we do an intake. You get an intake with me, and then we set up a protocol for you, and I make all kinds of recommendations. If you're at all interested, I really do recommend reading my book. It's going to be okay. Can you give your contact information? I will type it in. That is that is the best way to get a hold of me. That's my website.
And your phone number's on there.
Yeah. And my phone number's on there, and you talk to, we have 2 staff members, Katie and Kaylee, and they will talk to you and answer any questions and give you information. And, we truly have like an amazing team, and we do coaching. If it's appropriate, we'll do ERP coaching around very specific clinical issues. And I do have a parent community, but it's very specific to it's very specific to really solutions for special needs or struggling kids. So we're working on that too. But if you're looking, we work with people individually because people need care, and a lot of providers aren't working that. So I know, hold on. Raising. I'll put in here. Thank you for doing that.
I want to put it in the Facebook too. And there's another question in the Facebook chat, last one before we go.
Go ahead.
Now with kids doing class on screens, how much time of exercise is needed to detox from the screen dopamine rush?
Oh my God, such a good question. So here's the startling statistics, 2019. So 8 to 12-year-olds are spending almost 4.5 hours a day on screens. And 13 to 17-year-olds, it's 7.22 hours a day on devices. That's pre-pandemic. So it's what Dr. Krista Burns for the American Posture Institute says. It's every hour on the hour you need to do at least 1 minute of physical exercise.
Get up off the screen.
Get up off the screen. I'm a big fan of eye breaks. If people don't know about eye breaks, so you close your eyes, you count to 5, and you open your eyes and you give yourself a 5-second break. Your eyes need a break. I'm also a huge fan of the glasses. They work.
Mm-hmm.
So
the ones that take the blue
blocker glasses. So the counter, my PMF, we can run an electrosmog detox on it. So I run my kids on electrosmog detox every day, and it just helps to get it out of the system. But there's no rhyme or reason, but you really, the problem is the chronic sitting and the chronic input. It's just too much stimulation. You need time away. The nervous system needs time to power off. It's like when you go to turn your computer off and you haven't turned it off in a while, and you're like, oh my God, I have to be live. And it says it needs 38 minutes to reboot, like you need to do that. It's so important. And then somebody asked, OCD happens more during full moon. Listen, here's the deal. Our kids are more sensitive. They're more sensitive to barometrics. They're more sensitive to the moon. They're more sensitive to everything. So could it be OCD co-occurs at a very high rate with PANS and PANDAS? So an infectious or toxic trigger causes psychiatric or regression. So Gemma, I'll get that to you when we have it. Luminar will share it. I promise you when we do that. So that is something, tell me that's a big yes, you're interested in a 5-day challenge for better attention and executive functioning. Give me a yes.
Yeah, type it into the chat if you guys are interested.
So
I definitely want to share that information.
Okay. So we just decided this week. My dentist told me that she wanted me to do it. And I was like, you're right, Dr. Maria. So and I forget, I literally do this all the time. This is like for 20 something years, I did neuropsych testing, and a bulk of what I did was attention and executive functioning, And I just have so many hacks that are subtle, right? I'm all about easy hacks. That's what you'll read about in my book, is like, yes, there are big things we do. Sometimes we do neurofeedback. Sometimes we work with Luminara, and, sometimes we do big things. They're important. But on the daily, it's those little tweaks that make this massive difference in kids. Like my buddy, Dr. Dan, I'll leave you with this. He's a functional doctor, and I get on a podcast with him about once a month. So we're doing one today too. And he told me when I did the Raising Successful Kids Challenge, he told me in the 4 months that we had done these podcasts that he couldn't believe the difference in his kid. I was like, what do you mean? And he was like, you had been talking to me about teaching him coping skills. And I realized that I was getting in all this friction with him because I was helicoptering him. And I started to make these subtle changes instead of being like, okay, I'm so, you got a D, you're this, you're that. He was like, okay, you got a D. What are you gonna do about it? So he was like, the first 2 weeks, his son was like, didn't know what the heck to do and got all angry with him. And then he finally was like, I need help. And he's like, okay, all right. What do you think you need to do? He's like, okay, I think you need to. Can I help with this? He's like, okay, I need help with this. And then he
okay, I'll let you go. I just trying to figure out if I had time to go to the store or not.
Oops, someone's unmuted. Can you guys?
Yeah. So yeah, Carrie, you're muted. You're unmuted.
Okay.
She doesn't realize. So that's okay. It happens to the best of us. So he really, it just changed his relationship.
Bye.
Yeah. So, Carrie, you're unmuted. She's not paying attention. That's okay. So
I can't find
anyway. Yeah, there we go. So it's really helpful. What's NMT? I have no idea what that is.
That's what I do.
Okay.
Neuromodulation technique.
Yes, neuromodulation. I thought they meant in reference to me, and I was like, I have no idea. So, absolutely. So there's a lot we can do. Always have hope. Remember, it's going to be okay. And take whatever you're doing, take a treatment, stick with it. Don't be going back and forth. I think it's one of the biggest mistakes. Our kids need consistency in both how we approach things and as well as sticking with treatments. If you're using a homeopathic treatment, stick with it for a while. If the provider says it's got to be X amount of weeks, do it. Don't abandon it after three days. Don't call me after 2 sessions of neuro asking why it's not working, because I have it all over, so our kids are sensitive. They need, these things work, and there's a lot of evidence behind these things, and, just have faith and belief.
Oh, that's such a great note to end on. I really appreciate your being here, Dr. Rowe, and sharing all these great tips with parents. And just so amazing. I hope people can get your book and participate in the challenge this fall that you're putting together now. You're just such a help and have a big heart. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me with your mamas and papas. So, it's like we're all in this together, people. We all need each other.
We are. Thank you. And thanks everyone for joining, and we'll see you again soon.
Bye.
Bye.